Hello, I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is your Miami Dolphins versus the Cincinnati Bengals Thursday Night Football primetime game preview. Hey, we've got two of the best teams here in the National Football League. We've got the undefeated Miami Dolphins. They're taking on the 1-2 Cincinnati Bengals. Not only do we have a team that made it to the Super Bowl last season, but we got another team in Miami that has Super Bowl aspirations here in 2022. Now, the top two quarterbacks selected from the 2020 NFL draft, they will face off this week as Joe Burrow and those Cincinnati Bengals take on Tua Tagovailoa and the Miami Dolphins here on Thursday Night Football. Burrow, he was the top selection, while Tagovailoa was picked fifth selection, just ahead of Justin Herbert in that year's draft. Miami is just one of two remaining undefeated teams there after the Dallas Cowboys knocked off the New York Giants and after the Miami Dolphins knocked off the Buffalo Bills in that AFC East rivalry game just a week ago. Cincinnati, I talked about that one victory. It came over the New York Football Jets here last week, back in week 3, securing that first win of the season after losses to both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Dallas Cowboys. So now let's dive right in here. Let's talk about the tail of the tape, starting with the quarterback position and starting with Tua Tagovailoa. Now, we're going to focus all our attention on Tua this week because, quite frankly, I really didn't prepare anything for Teddy Bridgewater. But if Tagovailoa is unable to go this week, then Teddy Two Gloves, he's going to have to step in under center and see if he can get this Miami Dolphins offense rolling his way. Now, the biggest news, like I mentioned, coming from last week is that the NFLPA, they are going to be reviewing the concussion protocol that somehow allowed Tagovailoa to return to last week's game. Now, I've injured my back on multiple occasions there. I've injured my head multiple times. They look completely different. Then again, I'm not a doctor. Then again, hey, maybe this is more of Tagovailoa's Mike Tyson moment. You know, when Mike Tyson broke his back, the spinal part. Now, looking at that game here from last week, Tagovailoa, he made some big-time throws there to Waddle, especially down the middle, late in the game when they were needed the most. Now, Buffalo, they were missing some key defenders there in that defense, especially in that secondary. Tagovailoa there, he would completed 13 of 18 passes for 186 yards and a touchdown. Then again, the play and the time of possession, they were heavily weighed in Buffalo's favor throughout the game. The Bills ran 51 more offensive plays than what the Dolphins were able to do. When you look at the top 5 quarterbacks as far as catchable throw rates are concerned, per fantasy points data, you're going with guys like Daniel Jones, surprisingly at 86.4%, Kyle Murray at 86.7%, Josh Allen, 87.5%. Then we have Tua Tagovailoa there at 87.8%, just behind Aaron Rodgers, 89.4%. That is absolutely unreal. There's probably a good reason why Tyreek Hill did say that Tagovailoa threw a pretty accurate ball, perhaps even better than Patrick Mahomes. If you want to get more into stats, hey, they're out there right now. When you talk about deep ball completion percentage, deep ball catchables, I mean, Tagovailoa is amongst the tops in the class when it comes to that as well. Now, if I were a betting man, I bet that we see Tua this week suit up for this contest. Look, Joe Burrow, he was selected over him back in 2020, so he feels he probably has something to prove in this contest. But will that ankle hold up? Will that back hold up? Will his head hold up to Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard chasing him all over the place? Then again, Miami's offensive line, Teron Armstead, they got the job done against the Buffalo Bills and Von Miller a week ago. Now, the other quarterback in this game is Joe Cool himself, Joe Burrow. Is Burrow back? He just threw for 275 yards against the New York Football Jets, and he did throw for 3 touchdowns to drive his touchdown to interception ratio to a nice, healthy, respectable 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. He's got 6 on the season to 4 through 3 weeks. Now, it did look like Burrow was finally able to get into a rhythm last week. It helps when you're not getting sacked, not getting hit every single time that you drop back. So the Bengals offensive line, they held their own last week. The biggest difference is what Burrow was able to do from a clean pocket. His adjusted completion percentage, it went up from 75.4% in weeks 1 and 2 all the way up to 80.8% there in week number 3, while his passer rating jumped from 77.8 to 94.4%. Now, fun fact, the top 3 quarterbacks selected in that 2020 draft, Tua has the best winning percentage among them. He's 15-8, which works out to about a 652 winning percentage, which tops both Justin Herbert's 471 and Joe Burrow's 446. Cincinnati, they gave Burrow more time in the pocket last week, and it was his best game of the season. Miami, we know they're going to be bringing pressure again. We know they like to blitz, and they did a good job last week, despite that Josh Allen still threw for 400 yards. If Burrow has time, Miami has allowed 931 passing yards. Now, again, 400 of that is courtesy of Josh Allen last week. And they've also allowed 6 touchdowns. And on average, they have surrendered 25.95 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Now, turning our attention to the running backs, I don't know how big of a factor any of these backs are going to have in this contest, but hey, we've got to talk about them anyway, starting with Chase Edmonds of the Miami Dolphins. I really don't want to talk about the Miami run game because really it is non-existent. Now, if the Dolphins do decide to run, it's going to be tough. Michael Carter, Breece Hall, last week, they combined for 78 yards on 19 carries. But here's the thing. Edmonds, his value comes in the passing game. Last week, the Jets targeted Breece Hall 11 times against his Bengals defense, and he caught 6 of those targets. So if you're into those PPR-type leagues, this is one of those opportunities where Chase Edmonds is going to have more value than Raheem Mostert. Now, speaking of Raheem Mostert, it's going to be game script dependent on what his usage turns out to be and what these backs look like for Miami when it's all said and done. Looking at their usage last week in that contest against the Buffalo Bills, it was pretty well balanced between the two backs. You look Mostert there, he led the way with a 56% of the snaps and 10 opportunities, those carries plus touches and targets and all that fun stuff. Well, Edmonds, he saw only 7 opportunities on 44% of the snaps, despite being the more efficient of the two backs, scoring twice on those 6 carries. I know I said I didn't really want to talk about the running game because, quite frankly, Cincinnati, they have one of the best running backs in the game, but he hasn't been that guy the last 2 weeks. Now, the good news, we've already heard that Joe Mixon is good to go for Thursday Night Football after injuring his ankle against the Jets on Sunday. The bad news is Mixon was thoroughly disappointing with 48 yards on 15 touches. That's including a 2-yard per carry average. And Samaje Perine managing to score the touchdown on one of his 2 catches there while averaging 5.2 yards per carry on his 9 attempts. Rich Rebar there recently pointed out, of all the backs with the lowest percentage of carries resulting in either first downs or touchdowns, Mixon has the lowest with 10.3% there on a minimum of 20 carries. How bad is that? The base rate for that particular metric is 23.2%. Now, some more good news. Only Austin Eckler has more targets among running backs this season. And while Mixon has 0 touchdowns, he has had plenty of opportunities, 9 carries and 2 targets inside the red zone there. And right there, how I broke that down, that's basically what we call a crap sandwich. At the end of the day, it's still some dude named Samaje Perine, another dude named Chris Evans, and not even the good one at that are behind Mixon on this depth chart who pose no real threats whatsoever to those touches and targets. Now, this is what we came for. This is the main event of the Bengals, of the Dolphins, and it is the wide receivers, starting with Tyreek Hill. You remember that press conference there, post-game there for Miami versus Buffalo? The reporters, they're all in there talking about Thursday Night Football and Amazon Prime. The moment that Hill found out that he was going to be facing off against Eli Apple this week, he started the trash talk saying, "I owe you," and the cheetah is here. Now, basically, Tyreek Hill is that guy that went around on the playground. He pointed out Eli Apple, goes, "You know what? You're mine this week." Apple is going to have his hands full. Whether it's going to be Tyreek Hill, whether it's Jaylen Waddle, these are tough matchups for Eli Apple when it's all said and done. If I'm Eli Apple's mother, I'm probably not watching this week's contest. Let's be honest. All this because Apple ran his mouth. Why is Tyreek Hill feeling the way that he does? Well, if you recall the Bengals, they beat the Chiefs twice last season, near the end of the season, once in the playoffs in that AFC Championship game and once in the regular season. Now, after that AFC Championship game, Eli Apple essentially called Tyreek Hill a baby and then offered to send him Super Bowl tickets so that Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, they could come watch Eli Apple in that Super Bowl contest. So, you know what? I'm calling it right now. Tyreek Hill, he's going to go off this week, 200-plus receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. Yeah, the cheetah's about to run free in that Bengals secondary. In fact, I can even see the point where if we somehow see Eli Apple lining up on Jaylen Waddle, I see this where Tyreek Hill's just going to kind of cut in front of him in line and say, "No, I got next." And that's how this game is going to basically break down. Now, Jaylen Waddle, it doesn't matter who's on Jaylen Waddle. Look, in just 19 career games, Waddle has 123 career receptions, which is the second most all-time, only behind Odell Beckham Jr., who had 141 receptions in his first 20 contests. That is going to be something to keep an eye on this week here. I don't think that Jaylen Waddle is going to see something like 15 receptions in this game, but hey, there is an outside chance that he could break Odell Beckham Jr.'s reception record within the first 20 career games. If you caught my last Friday night hype show on Fantasy Points, you already knew what kind of historic season that Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle were putting together. Right now, they rank number 1 and 2 in yards per route run per PFF there, with Waddle checking in at 3.98 and Hill at 3.34. Waddle has actually been Tua Tagovailoa's first read 37.5% of the time through 3 weeks per fantasy points data. Now, Waddle and Hill rank second and third in receiving yards behind only Stephon Diggs, both topping 300 yards. So the status of Tua Tagovailoa heading into this one is going to be probably more important than most quarterbacks. If Hill gets his rematch with Eli Apple, then Chidobe Awuzie and Mike Hilton, they are going to be asked to match up against Jaylen Waddle, depending on where Waddle takes the majority of those snaps. And we know that Mike McDaniel is probably going to move him around from the slot to the outside, move him all over this formation. When you're talking about the top trio of wide receivers in the National Football League, Cincinnati, they've got you covered. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. We're going to touch on all three of these receivers here in just a moment. And we're going to start it off with Jamar Chase. We have seen how this plays out between Chase and Higgins, as they are basically interchangeable as the Bengals' number one wide receiver. So it really shouldn't surprise anyone that in the last 2 weeks that T. Higgins has been the more productive of the two. Chase has 11 receptions on 19 targets for 83 yards and a touchdown on 125 snaps, averaging 25.3 fantasy points per game. Whereas Higgins is doing more with less. In that same 2-week period, Higgins has 11 receptions on 17 targets for 164 and a touchdown, averaging 33.4 fantasy points per game on just 107 snaps. Chase has been Burrow's number one read on 38.6% of the targets so far this season on those first reads, which is interesting because the last couple of weeks, Higgins has been more productive of the two. And either way, I'm expecting Xavier Howard to draw the coverage on Jamar Chase in this game. Now, Higgins, like Tagovailoa there, he kind of somehow passed some sort of concussion protocol mid-game. And unlike Tagovailoa, Higgins had missed the previous week due to a concussion that he received back in week number 1. So maybe the NFLPA really does need to focus on this whole concussion protocol type thing. Now, Higgins, he will likely draw Nick Needham here this week, who made some pretty darn good plays there against a longer, more physical Gabriel Davis last week. Needham is a much better slot defender than he is on the outside, but you can't argue the results so far. After Byron Jones there and Trill Williams went down due to injury, it was Needham that stepped up for the Dolphins in this secondary. Finally, we have Tyler Boyd. Hey, I don't know why you say we finally have Tyler Boyd. I mean, the dude is one of the best wide receivers out there that nobody's ever talking about. You put him on any other team, and he is no worse than their number 2 option there in the passing game. This could very well end up being a Tyler Boyd type game, coming off a 4-catch, 105-yard performance against the Jets back in week number 3. If Higgins or Chase were ever to go down or ever to miss time, we know that Tyler Boyd is more than capable of producing. When teams decide to double team Jamar Chase or double team T. Higgins, you know that leaves Tyler Boyd one-on-one, and that's a matchup that Joe Burrow loves to see. And the Bengals, they definitely take advantage of that whenever that presents itself. Finally, the tight end position. Hey, this is even uglier than the running backs that we talked about earlier. We didn't even talk about Samaje Perine or Chris Evans in depth. Really, it's just Joe Mixon when we talk about running backs. But at the tight end position, I really don't have to talk about anyone, but we're going to throw in 2 names for you. Mike Gesicki. I can't be alone in my theory here because you know what? I love to see everyone suffer. If I have to see something, everyone has to see something. So I kind of want to see another Gesicki gritty kind of dance going on in this one. And he may be even worse than Mac Jones when it comes to busting out the gritty. Now, one thing to watch is his usage. Back in week 3, Gesicki saw just 36% of the snaps while being asked to block as often as running his routes. On the season, he has seen just 6% of a target share. Yeah, that's not good. Then again, hey, last week, the Bengals, they did allow Tyler Conklin to run loose to the tune of 84 yards on 8 receptions. Finally, Hayden Hurst, great guy, even better hair, but very little fantasy production this season to speak of. The good news is, again, the Miami Dolphins have yielded the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the tight end position so far this season, thanks in part to surrendering 30 receptions for 269 yards in just 3 contests. With that all being said, take a second right now, head to fantasypoints.com, use promo code 22Vipers10, get 10% off whatever that subscription is. Hey, we just referenced that Fantasy Points data. You get all that on the website there. They got all kinds of research and tools at your disposal to take advantage of and win your weekly fantasy matchups. This has been another Primetime Preview. I'm Matt Donnelly. We'll see you next week.